Hello, I'm Dr. Anna Greka. I'm the past president of the American Society for Clinical Investigation, and it's my great pleasure to be here today with Dr. Kevin Sheth, who is the recipient of the 2026 ASCI Bruce Scharschmidt and Peggy Crawford Award. This award recognizes important contributions in the development of high-impact diagnostics or therapeutics for patients, and it has been an award established in honor of Bruce and Peggy. Bruce is a past president of the American Society of Clinical Investigation and a biotechnology entrepreneur and pioneer. And so it's particularly meaningful to Bruce and Peggy that we have such a distinguished recipient for the award this year in you, Kevin. So our guest today, Kevin Sheth, is the founding chief of the Division of Neurocritical Care and Emergency Neurology and associate chair for clinical research at Yale. And again, it's a great honor and pleasure. Congratulations again on receiving this award from the ASCI. And it's a great pleasure to have the chance to speak with you today. So welcome. I just thought we would start our conversation perhaps from maybe having you describe a little bit about your path to these discoveries, or even how you became interested in this question in the first place, and sort of the journey for you and your team in coming to these discoveries and their impact on patients.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me here. And I just want to say on behalf of myself and our broad research teams or trainees, how grateful we were to receive this award in the first place, especially from a leader in this incredible organization and from someone who really has thought about translational medicine, both in a fundamental way and also in various ways and how it can be disseminated in the applied world. So it really is an honor, and I just want to say thank you.
Of
And
course.
in terms of our interest in this in first place, just to give you a little bit of background, so I'm a vascular and critical care neurologist and a physician scientist here at Yale. And our group's work increasingly has centered on a single broad question, which is that how do we scale brain health and neurological care to populations that current biology and current systems simply may not reach very well?
Mhm.
And from early on, I was always drawn both to the science and the idea that systems can be redesigned. Within medicine, I mean, I found neurology to be intellectually fascinating, but also frustrating sometimes because
Mhm.
neurological disease is devastating, it's common, and it's often detected too late. So I became interested in things like stroke, both acute stroke treatment and also prevention of things like stroke and dementia, because it sits at the intersection of emergency care, chronic disease, imaging, prevention, technology, and health systems. And actually, the project that we were talking about in this award, the development of and the deployment of portable MRI systems, the thing that really pushed us was that we were trying to develop through translational programs biological targets that were implicated in acute brain injury, brain swelling, uh, early forms of injury. We needed to develop pharmacodynamic markers, brain imaging markers that would allow us to see whether or not our interventions were working, where none existed. And it was very challenging to do in critically ill patients. So the development of this technology, being able to image at high resolution at the bedside, was a natural way to both develop the technology in an interdisciplinary way, but also facilitate the translational development of exciting biological discoveries.
That's remarkable, and the accessibility to patients by doing this in such a manner, I think, is really remarkable and extremely empowering, I would imagine, right, for all the colleagues who also have the opportunity to now use this technology. Maybe you could speak for a moment about the ease or difficulty with which you were able to take this from what was happening in your laboratory, within your own team, to something that can actually be used more widely. I think that could be very interesting to colleagues to hear about that.
It's been an interesting journey, and like a lot of these things, as you know, it's certainly not a linear path.
Sure.
There are multiple laboratories working around the field for decades on sort of low magnetic field, the
Hmm.
opposite of actually most MRI machines, which are higher and higher magnetic
Exactly.
field, right?
Yeah.
But that had been living in the lab. And so in order to get it translated, first of all, some of the challenges were that we had to find a funding home for something like this
Mhm.
because it sat at the intersection. And ultimately, we were able to develop an exciting academic industry NIH partnership in
Mhm.
order to actually put the teams together. The teams, which included physicists, engineers, and
Right.
uh, clinical physician scientists like myself.
Mhm.
And the challenge then was taking a prototype that we were able to iterate off of, but then deploy it in the clinical setting. And to be honest, at the very beginning, when we were thinking about the engineering and the science and the physics and the clinical use cases, we didn't always think about things like form factor or what it meant in a nursing workflow or how you
Right.
would actually wheel it through the hospital. What about all the machines, dialysis machines and EKGs that might provide electromagnetic interference with a
Mm.
magnet?
Of
So
course.
these were common, maybe mundane things that became very relevant. And through a process of iteration, we were able to get there. I'll finally end by saying, we had ideas about the disease context in which we were going to validate the use of this new tool or technology, but the registration data actually came during the COVID pandemic.
Oh, wow.
As you'll remember, that was a time in the early days in which patients couldn't easily obtain brain imaging, right, because of
Right.
infection control reasons.
Mhm.
And it ended up being the use case that provided us with registration data.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that where there's difficulty, there's opportunity, right? And that's
Absolutely.
incredible. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I guess I'm curious, based on this conversation, for some of our younger colleagues who are potentially listening to this, what kind of lessons do you think you learned along the way in your own sort of journey, in your own career, that could be useful to someone who says, like maybe a young neurologist or physician scientist working in this space? What have you learned, and what would your message be, I guess, to some of our younger colleagues?
Yeah, a couple of quick lessons. One is that, as I mentioned, that careers are often less linear than they appear from the outside. Sometimes people assume that successful scientists follow a clean upward trajectory, but most careers involve uncertainty, failed ideas, setbacks, and redirections. And actually, we sometimes enrich for people who are risk averse in our environments, but I would
Mhm.
say actually run towards risk.
Right.
A second lesson, I think, in that context is to choose important problems rather than just fashionable techniques. Technologies change rapidly, and the underlying human problems are often more durable. I'd also encourage trainees to cultivate breadth without losing depth
Mm.
and never think of yourself at being a level. Sometimes in a good way of progressive responsibility, our systems are designed to sort of see one, do one, teach one. But
Uh-huh.
at the same time, I've always impressed by trainees who don't think of themselves at a level and oftentimes come up with insights that just as much as frequently as someone who's been practicing or doing science for 30 or 40 years. So just think that what you're doing is the most important thing in the world, and that there's nothing that you
Mm.
can't do at any point in your career.
Wow, that's a tremendous lesson. I think that's wonderful, as a message to our younger colleagues. I guess I'm curious from your perspective, picking up a little bit on what you said earlier, that it took a collaboration between academia and, federal funding and industry, coming together to make this a reality. What lessons are there in that experience for you? Because, it's often the case that colleagues might think that, making partnerships with any of these different entities might be challenging or difficult. So, what were some of the lessons that you learned, and would you encourage others to pursue these kinds of multidisciplinary and also, with multiple different institutions and entities, relationships that can facilitate these discoveries?
Sometimes I'm still surprised to hear that there are perceptions about working with generically different groups of partners. But I would
Mhm.
say that if your approach, irrespective of your partner or your funding source, is one of integrity, rigorous science, and high quality work that you disseminate openly and freely in a transparent way, well, if those foundations are there, then you can and you should partner with anyone that can really push the science forward
Mhm.
for big problems. That's just at least my fundamental belief. The second thing is that, different partners do have different needs and pressures. And I think putting yourselves in the shoes of other people and thinking about what those might be is important. I don't think it's intrinsically wrong to think about what might be sort of commercial pressures that a drug developer or a technology may have. It's
Hmm.
not my personal
Right.
interest, but I think now understanding where that's one piece of the puzzle, actually, it can help align the opportunities. And I think it shows actually true respect for partnership. You'd hope
Hmm.
that they do the same for us in our
Right.
interests, for example. So I think that's that's the other piece. And then I think the last thing that I would say, and I think this is true for different partners, but even in the academic domain, none of us are naive, but at the same time, be willing to give up credit, be willing to share. We
Hmm.
know how much pressure there is sometimes to be the contact PI or the
Yeah,
first and last author.
sure.
But I've found that in general, in working with teams, that if everybody is going towards an important goal, you can think about sort of how to grow the pie and then split it, as opposed to
Hmm.
just splitting the existing pie.
Yes.
And I found that giving things up in the short run, even if you were to say selfishly speaking, it turns out to be a bigger win in the long run most of the time.
Mhm. That's a wonderful lesson, and I want to especially underscore this because we're here celebrating you as the recipient of an award, and yet, this sort of generous approach to how you do your science really is a testament to the fact that you can be both generous and collaborative with colleagues and be recognized for those incredible contributions. And so, as you say, it's like growing the pie, sharing it with more people, but still getting credit for, the impact of your work on patients, right?
These things are not mutually exclusive,
Exactly.
and doing it that way allows you to succeed, or it helps make it a little bit more likely, and it's certainly a lot more fun.
For sure. And I couldn't agree more with that. I think that's entirely true. So, I guess as we think about the future, clearly you've made a tremendous amount of progress, but I could imagine that there's sort of next frontiers or next steps that you might want to take. So I was just curious, in which directions are you currently seeing this work moving forward?
We're so excited about this technology. I think developing new tools in science allows us to make new observations, and
Hmm.
and then that sets the stage for a lot of hypotheses. So I think at least we believe that's what's happening here. If you were to just look at the number of papers or labs that were studying this technology 5 years ago versus now, I mean, you would just see an exponential rise. So, to be part of a lot of people that are sort of developing and pushing a new field, super exciting. To just give you a couple of quick concrete
Yes.
examples. Number one, what you get when you go to a low magnetic field, as you can imagine, is a trade-off with image quality and resolution. But at the same time, today, we can deploy techniques based on image reconstruction and artificial intelligence that have been
Hmm.
applied to a lot of imaging fields broadly and
Yes.
bring that here. So that is going to continue to, I think, really go forward. Very exciting. On
Hmm.
the other hand, as a critical care and emergency neurologist, we validated a lot of this work in the acute inpatient setting. But I think the most exciting use is actually going to be out in the community. The
Okay.
MRI was one of the most successful technologies from the 20th century, but today not available to most of the people on the planet. Now that you can put this on wheels, you can
Hmm.
put it in outpatient clinics, in remote villages, and in the
Hmm.
back of a van. And I think bringing this technology to make equitable access and to make new observations in the community,
Hmm.
I think that's a very exciting frontier.
Are you aware of programs that are bringing this kind of technology to like the global south, for example, places like that where there might not be as much availability of MRI imaging otherwise?
Absolutely. This year, the International Society for Magnetic Resonance Imaging had their keynote meeting in South Africa.
Oh,
And the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have sponsored this work throughout Africa, where there are many scanners deployed. The first portable systems were just deployed in India, and it's now being used on virtually every continent.
wow.
So I think we're at the very early stages of this, and at least I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's tremendous. I guess I'm curious about something that sort of touches a little bit more on the work that I do, and I was curious about whether this technology could be ultimately adapted to that. But of course, there's a lot of talk about molecular markers, right? Like trying to do molecular imaging as well. And so I guess I'm curious whether the trade-off on resolution actually allows or does not allow for us to think about, tracers or other things that can be used to look at molecular markers in the brain, perhaps earlier in the progression of disease. Curious what you think about that combined with your technology.
I think groups are just asking those questions right now. So certainly the idea is to use it in humans at earlier stages.
Hmm.
There are people using not just for earlier, but also for serial dynamic and spatial
Mm.
and temporal profiles to get serial imaging much more
Mhm.
easier. There are groups, our group and other groups are using this in animal models in the
Mhm.
preclinical setting, actually. And then the development of it's a low magnetic field. So
Mhm.
I know that there are other groups on the academic and industry side that are developing sort of new contrast agents and new tracers as we speak that can be
Mhm.
optimized for a low magnetic
I
field.
see.
So it's still unknown. It's not proven that these things are going to work, but I know there's a lot of investigation happening in that area.
That's really cool. That's very interesting. And now maybe for the potential people in the audience when they hear this, who would be aspiring physician scientists, I wanted to take us back to when you were also sort of, thinking about becoming a physician scientist and sort of thinking back now with all the wisdom you have gained in this journey. Um, you know, how was it back then for you? How did you make certain decisions that brought you to where you are today? And I guess what words would you have for someone who is not yet a physician, a colleague, but is aspiring to become one of us? I'm curious what you might have for them.
First of all, I would say just be open and go where your heart goes. I will say that big initiatives, federal initiatives, make a difference. I got interested in neuroscience in the 1990s, which was a time when Congress and our federal government actually proclaimed it as the decade of the brain.
That's right.
Because of that proclamation, actually, now it's ubiquitous everywhere. But I was at Johns Hopkins, one of the first neuroscience majors,
Hmm.
and I think that wouldn't have happened actually if it wasn't for that initiative that led to those programs that led to me being pulled in the first place.
Wow.
So I think keep your eyes open, look for these big things that are happening. I think that's number one. Number two, I don't think that you should go away from the crowd just for the sake of being different or going away from the crowd. On
Hmm.
the other hand, I do remember that a lot of people were a little bit hesitant to sort of do investigation in neuroscience,
Hmm.
or certainly from a clinical perspective, to do things in neurology because, well, geez, you could describe the problem, but what could you do? And I
Right.
think I think anybody in neurology remembers that today, remembers
Yeah.
that sort of era, and it's changed. The way I thought about it was, well, it can't, it's such an important problem, these problems, it can't stay that way forever. It
Right.
has to change. And so why not be a part of that change? It's
Mhm.
it's gotta change, and maybe we'll sort of push that change. So sometimes the reason, I've had this funny thing, I'm sure you have as well, that when everybody tells you not to do something or not to go somewhere, it's either a reason not to do something, or
Sure.
maybe that's exactly where you should go.
I love it. I think that's entirely true, and it's great advice too. I think it's an very inspiring message for our younger colleagues, and hopefully many more will become interested in this space now that there's such exciting developments thanks to your work as well. I think it's
No, definitely. The diagnostics and therapeutics and the broad neuroscience landscape, as you know, really just continue to be at sort of multiple dynamic inflection points. I mean, what an exciting time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know that you're of course a distinguished physician scientist and now an awardee for the ASCI, but I guess sort of at a more kind of human level, I'm just curious, what do you like to do for fun outside of work?
I got to tell you, so the things that I love most in life, outside of work, really probably center around my family and my three children. I'm very
Oh
lucky to
gosh.
have a rising ninth grader, a rising seventh grader, and a rising third grader, a boy and two girls.
Oh my
They
gosh.
really keep me grounded, let me tell you, and I think I really love that, and that makes me very happy. My son just 2 weeks ago, I'll sort of brag for a moment about him.
Of
But
course.
but but
Of course.
two weeks ago, he's become interested in an area that I have nothing to add. I don't know anything about, which is robotics. He's gotten really
Oh,
into the robotics, and
awesome.
he was in St. Louis. His middle school team was competing there for the World Robotics Competition,
Oh my gosh.
and
Okay.
and they had middle school robotics teams from China, Kazakhstan, Ecuador, literally the entire world.
Ah.
And to me, I felt like probably people feel like when they go to our neuroscience conferences or the stroke conferences, was completely lost. But it was just amazing to see these young kids who were
Hmm.
really just doing incredible work and very passionate, just getting pulled into these rabbit holes in a really positive way, you
That's
know?
great.
And so, just seeing, the wonderful thing about having kids, one thing I didn't appreciate was that in addition to all the other wonderful things is it allows you to learn about the world again,
Hmm.
through their eyes, so you
Yes,
get to
of course.
relearn and that's just really fun and magical.
That's wonderful. It's really wonderful to hear. So, Kevin, we've had a really enjoyable conversation. I'm curious if there's any area that we didn't cover or anything else that you wanted to say in kind of closing, perhaps, this conversation.
The main message that I would say is that ASCI is just such a wonderful, broad organization of physician scientists and people who want to change the world. It's been a privilege for me to be a part of it, and to be recognized by your peers is just, I just can't tell you what it means for our broad group, and so we're so grateful. Thank you.
Oh, it's wonderful. It was a great pleasure for me to have the chance to sit down with you today and really chat. And congratulations again on this extremely well-deserved award. So, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.